Rule 1. Identify premises and conclusions. This is from A Workbook for Arguments by Morrow and Weston. The objectives for this video are to first learn the first step in making an argument, define the words conclusion and premise, look at a few examples of arguments from our culture, and then talk about using an argument as a means of inquiry. The first step in making an argument is to ask yourself what it is you're trying to prove. What's your conclusion? The conclusion is the statement that you're giving reasons to try to support. The statements that you give, or your reasons, are called premises. So, here's an example from Winston Churchill. I'm an optimist. It doesn't seem to be much use being anything else. So, if we were going to formalize Churchill's argument, it might look something like this. The first premise: it does not seem to be much use to be anything other than an optimist. And this leads to our conclusion, so I'm an optimist. However, premises and conclusions are not always so obvious. Here, Sherlock Holmes is explaining one of his deductions in The Adventure of Silverblaze. A dog was kept in the stall, and yet, though someone had been in and fetched out a horse, the dog had not barked. Obviously, the visitor was someone who the dog knew well. So, Holmes's argument here has two premises. One of the premises is explicit. The dog didn't bark at the visitor. The other is a general fact that Holmes assumes we know about dogs. This is that dogs bark at strangers. Together, these two premises imply that the visitor was not a stranger. And in the story, this turns out to be the key to solving the mystery, as it normally is in the Sherlock Holmes books. So if we're going to formalize Holmes's argument, we might do it like this. The first premise: dogs bark at strangers. The second premise: the dog did not bark at the visitor. And this leads to Holmes's conclusion: so the visitor wasn't a stranger. Another way that we can use arguments is as a means of inquiry. To use something as a means of inquiry means that you're using an argument to learn new things. When using an argument in this way, you might start with only the conclusion that you're trying to defend. You then learn about the strength of this conclusion as you look for premises to support the conclusion, and then challenge these premises to make it better. If you are in this situation, you want to make sure that you state your conclusion very clearly from the beginning. Maybe we can return to Churchill's argument as a form of inquiry. Maybe you want to make the argument to take Churchill a step farther and argue that you and I should also be optimists in order to learn about the value of being an optimist. If this is the case, you should say so explicitly. So, we should all be optimists. Then, you want to ask yourself what reasons you have for drawing this conclusion. The conclusion that we should all be optimists. What reason can you give for this? One reason that you might come up with for being an optimist is that being an optimist boosts your energy to work for success. Whereas, if you feel defeated in advance, you may not even try. Maybe another reason is that optimists are more likely to succeed to achieve their goals. All of these reasons, or premises, can go into our argument. So let's look at how we might formalize this argument. Premise 1. Being an optimist boosts your energy to work for success. Whereas, if you feel defeated in advance, you may never even try. Premise 2. Optimists are more likely to achieve their goals. So, our conclusion: we should all be optimists. Notice that there may be a lot of reasons to reject any of these premises. Maybe we don't think that optimists are more likely to achieve their goals. That's perfectly okay, and rejecting premises is going to be an important part of this class, and is in fact an important part of using arguments as a form of inquiry. Finding reasons to reject your premises and better ways to reformulate them to avoid these problems is right at the center of using an argument as a method of inquiry. But we're going to have the opportunity to talk about all of this in much more depth moving forward. All right. To review, hopefully you should be able to answer these questions. What's the first step in making an argument? What's a conclusion? What is a premise? What is the process for using an argument as a means of inquiry?